Morning light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting soft patterns of red, gold, and violet onto the polished floor of the old Chicago chapel. The air inside was hushed, reverent. A single breath out of place would have felt too loud. Aisha stood at the altar, bouquet held close to her chest. Her hands trembled, just slightly, not from nerves, not from doubt, but from everything she had carried to this moment. She glanced at Michael standing across from her, his gaze steady, his smile quiet. He looked proud, hopeful, but he didn't see the way her fingers clenched around the folded vow card. She had rewritten those vows 3 times. In the second row, behind a curtain of polite smiles and tailored suits, a woman leaned to whisper, "A black community doctor? That's who he's marrying?" A soft laugh followed, clipped and careless, like the sound of glass cracking beneath a shoe. Aisha didn't flinch, but she heard every syllable. She kept her eyes forward. She didn't need to look back to feel their judgment, because what she was about to reveal during her vows would silence the entire room. Let me take you back to the moment it all started. If you love stories like this, hit subscribe and let us keep bringing powerful moments to your screen. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the sidewalk outside the clinic still glistened, puddles catching the morning light like forgotten coins. A faded awning flapped gently in the breeze above a door marked simply, Thompson Community Health. Inside, the air was warm and alive with quiet motion. The hum of a space heater in the corner, the soft click of a secondhand clock, the scent of menthol rub, hand sanitizer, and old paper mingled in the air like memory. Aisha stood in a pair of worn white sneakers, sleeves rolled up, stethoscope draped casually around her neck. She was bent over a child's arm, checking for a rash. Her tone was calm, careful, like music played softly in a waiting room. "You've been eating too many peanut butter crackers again, huh?" The boy nodded sheepishly. "Let's switch to oatmeal this week. No more scratching contests, deal?" The mother, sitting nearby, smiled in relief. "Thank you, Dr. Thompson. No one listens like you do." Aisha only nodded, already scribbling notes into the boy's chart. Behind her, the hallway flickered to life with another shuffle of footsteps. The day was only just beginning. The clinic was small, 4 rooms, 1 nurse, a receptionist who doubled as translator when needed. The wallpaper peeled at the edges. The chairs didn't match. But the place pulsed with something money couldn't buy. Dignity. There were no marble floors here, no designer gowns sweeping through wide corridors. Just people. Sick people. Scared people. People who, most days, felt invisible. But not here. Not with her. She moved between patients like a quiet force of nature, measured, attentive, always present. A child with asthma. A grandmother with swollen joints. A factory worker whose cough hadn't gone away in months. Each one was more than a case. They were stories she carried with care. At lunch, she sat alone in her office, bare walls, a plant that refused to die, and a bookshelf filled with borrowed textbooks. Across from her, on the desk, lay a worn, leather-bound logbook. She opened it slowly. The pages were full. Names, dates, notes scribbled in her quick, slanted hand. Some in English, some in Vietnamese, Spanish, Polish. She traced one name with her finger and smiled faintly. From the drawer, she pulled out an old photograph. 2 figures stood side by side in front of a modest corner store. Her parents, her father in a work-stained shirt, her mother with tired but hopeful eyes. They had come to America with a suitcase and a promise that their daughter would have more. Not more money, more meaning. She whispered, barely audible, "This is for you." Then, closing the book, she looked at the cover like one might look at a framed diploma on a wall, not with pride, but with purpose. "This," she murmured, "is my Harvard, my legacy." And with that, she stood, tossed her paper napkin, and stepped back into the hallway, where a line of new stories waited to be heard. It was raining the first time he walked into her world. Not the kind of rain that rushes or shouts. This was a slow, soaking kind. The kind that quiets cities. The kind that makes you think. And Michael Harris had a lot on his mind. He stood in the doorway of the clinic, drops sliding from the shoulders of his designer coat, one hand clutching a thick folder wrapped in plastic. His eyes searched the room, hesitant, until they found her. Aisha looked up from the front desk, her sleeves pushed high, a pen tucked behind one ear. She didn't blink at the expensive coat or the shoes that definitely didn't belong on cracked linoleum. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice low, even. He stepped forward. "My father. He's been coughing nonstop. He won't go to a hospital, but he'll come here." Aisha took the folder from him, her fingers brushing his just briefly. "Let's take a look," she said, as if she did this for worried sons every day. And she did. In the exam room, she moved with quiet confidence, her hands steady, her words simple. She explained his father's condition like a map. This valve here, this pressure here, this risk if untreated. Michael watched her, not just hearing, but listening. There was something in the way she spoke, like she wasn't just reading charts, but reading people. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the urge to interrupt. He returned the next week. No new symptoms, just 2 coffees. "I thought maybe we could talk about my father's diet," he said, smiling. They talked about heart medication, about sodium, about jazz music somehow, then about books. And at some point, the rain outside stopped, but neither of them noticed. Their meetings became routine, casual but not careless, familiar but never forced. It was the kind of slow-burn connection that didn't demand attention, but earned it. Then came the night she stepped into his world. It was a dinner. Not formal, but not casual either. The Harris residence towered along Lakeshore Drive, glass and steel rising like a monument to inheritance. Inside, the walls were hung with oil paintings, family portraits in gold leaf frames. The carpet was the kind that muffled footsteps and opinions alike. Aisha arrived in a navy blue dress. Simple, elegant. It carried the scent of fresh detergent and just a trace of vanilla. Michael opened the door with a soft smile, but tension clung to his shoulders. In the foyer, his father stood tall, silver hair combed perfectly back. Charles Harris shook Aisha's hand as if testing her grip for weakness. His cufflinks gleamed like small judgments. Beside him, Evelyn Harris, poised, pearls around her neck, eyes assessing, offered a smile that didn't quite reach her pupils. "You work in community health?" she asked, like reciting a line from a foreign language. Aisha answered with ease. "Yes, in Bronzeville. We serve mostly uninsured families." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to register. "Ah," Evelyn said. "How noble." But it wasn't just the words. It was the way Evelyn's gaze paused a moment too long on Aisha's skin, the way her tone folded community and uninsured into something just slightly stained. At dinner, the table stretched longer than necessary. Conversation floated above Aisha's head, hedge funds, wine vintages, Ivy League stories. Michael tried to draw her in, but the others had built walls from small talk and inside jokes. She laughed politely, even when the air wasn't meant for her. Ethan, Michael's older brother, raised a glass. "To Aisha. May she find her way through all this." The words were sweet. The smirk behind them wasn't. She knew what all this meant. And it wasn't just the size of the house. Aisha smiled. She had seen subtler scalpels. After dessert, she stood in the hall for a moment alone. Fingertips tracing the edge of a family photo hung just slightly off-center. Rows of Harris men in suits. All fair, all polished, all frozen in legacy. The only brown face in the house was her reflection in the glass. She didn't belong there, but she wasn't leaving. The chandelier above the ballroom was a constellation in gold, suspended elegance, casting soft halos onto the polished floors below. Everything shimmered, the crystal glasses, the designer gowns, even the laughter, light and floating, like perfume in the air. The engagement party of Michael Harris and Dr. Aisha Thompson was, on the surface, perfect. A quartet played in the corner. Waiters glided by with silver trays. Toasts were raised, smiles exchanged, and yet, under the sheen of civility, something colder pulsed. Unspoken, but not unfelt. Aisha stood near the edge of the room, her dress the color of plum wine. simple against the sea of sequins. Her posture was relaxed, but her senses sharp. She could feel it in the way conversations dipped when she approached, in how eyes scanned her outfit with the same precision she used on an X-ray. And sometimes, they didn't stop at her dress. They lingered, just a second too long, on her skin. She was the only black woman in the room, and no one had to say it. The room had been designed to whisper it. A woman with diamond cuffs leaned toward another guest, her voice a sugar-slick whisper. "She's lovely, just simple. I mean, does she even know which fork is for salad?" Aisha turned away before she could hear the answer, but the laugh that followed was clear enough. Later, at the champagne toast, Ethan tapped his glass with a spoon, grinning. "To our future sister-in-law," he began, "who brings something very special to the table. A backup plan. If the caterer fails tonight, we've got a doctor on call." Laughter again. Polite. Louder this time. Michael's hand tightened around Aisha's. She gently squeezed back. "Don't." She smiled at Ethan. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the soul, but shields it. Between courses, Evelyn passed by Aisha's chair, pausing just long enough to murmur, "You must find this all overwhelming. Such a different world from your clinic, I imagine." Aisha nodded, voice steady. "Not really. People everywhere are more alike than they think." But Evelyn's smile lingered, edged with something unsaid, something that suggested you're still other. The music swelled, the lights dimmed, but the weight inside her chest only grew heavier. Not from shame, but from knowing. From recognizing every condescending glance, every backhanded compliment for what it was, a test, a measure, a reminder that no matter her degrees or accomplishments, her blackness came first in their eyes. They didn't want to know her, they wanted to define her. In the ladies' room, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her earrings were borrowed, her makeup light. But her eyes, those hadn't changed. Still clear, still calm, still hers. She returned to the ballroom without fixing anything. She didn't need to, because while they measured status in wine pairings and last names, Aisha measured it in something quieter, steadier. And she was already building her answer, not in words, but in the kind of legacy they would never see coming. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Langham in a private room dressed in muted golds and creams, where chandeliers shimmered like still water, and the silence between clinks of silver felt curated. A string quartet played in the background. Mozart, perhaps, or something meant to sound expensive. Waiters in pressed uniforms floated between tables, refilling glasses with practiced grace. The Harris family had spared no expense. It was all curated to impress, to declare, "This is our world." But Aisha noticed the way chairs had been arranged. How the cousins sat together. How the seats closest to the head table had been carefully filled with names that belonged. Hers had been placed at the edge, next to a window that framed the city she came from, but far from the conversation at the center. She didn't mind. She was used to being on the edges. It was where she learned to see clearly. Michael had stayed close all evening, his hand brushing hers beneath the table, his smile a quiet apology that she never asked for. But it was the final toast that made her rise. Ethan stood again, full of wine and inherited charm. "To my brother," he said, lifting his glass, "who finally found a woman who's not chasing the family fortune, just building her own little clinic on the side." The laughter was light, but it rang loud in her ears. Aisha placed her napkin gently on the table, then stood. No one called on her to speak. She just began. "Thank you," she said softly. "For the food, the music, the seating arrangement by the window." A few chuckles. Confused, uneasy. "I know I've been a quiet presence," she continued, "and I'm okay with that. I've always preferred letting my work speak first." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded document. The room stilled, not out of interest, but instinct. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight, but I've decided it's time some things were clear." She unfolded the paper slowly, the way a surgeon reveals an incision. Precise, unshaking. "I don't run a little clinic. I own and operate 25 health centers across the Midwest. In the past year alone, we served over 15,000 patients, and our projected revenue next quarter will put us well into 7 figures. A silence fell, not out of politeness, but the kind that descends before a storm. Evelyn dropped her fork. Charles blinked once, then again. Ethan's smirk collapsed into an awkward swallow. Aisha's voice never wavered. I built this with no trust fund, no legacy to inherit, just purpose and people, and the belief that everyone deserves care, not just those with country club memberships. She looked around the room, not seeking applause, but making sure every eye met hers. I didn't come into this family to prove anything, but I won't let anyone decide my worth for me. And then, quieter. Especially not those who have never known struggle. She refolded the document, slid it back into her bag. Michael rose beside her, his expression unreadable, somewhere between pride and disbelief. To love, he said, raising his glass. Aisha joined him, her voice like a blade wrapped in silk. To clarity. No one laughed. No one clapped. For once, the room had nothing to say. The chapel bells rang, but softly, like wind chimes caught in memory. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, just as it had at the rehearsal, but now it felt warmer, as if the light itself had shifted its allegiance. Guests rose as the music began, not with excitement, but with a quiet gravity. The room held its breath. At the far end of the aisle stood Aisha. Her gown was ivory silk, simple, flowing, with no sparkle, no embellishment. But on her, it carried a weight that shimmered far deeper than sequins. Her locks were swept into an elegant twist, a single pearl pin tucked behind one ear. No veil, no apology. She walked alone, chin high, bouquet steady. There was no trembling now, no need. Every step was measured, not toward approval, but toward a life she had chosen on her terms. People watched, and this time they didn't whisper. Evelyn clutched her clutch tighter. Charles blinked too often. Ethan stared, but didn't smirk, because something in her walk, something in her stillness, had stilled them. Michael's eyes met hers the entire way. He didn't smile wide. He didn't need to. His expression said it all. I see you. They met at the altar. The priest gave a soft nod, and this time, Aisha spoke first. Her voice was low, clear, like the opening note of a spiritual. Michael, you have never asked me to be smaller, not once. In a world that often demands that of black women, you never flinched when I stood tall. She paused. And today, I stand not just as your partner, but as someone who believes our love should do more than survive. It should heal. From within the folds of her dress, she drew a velvet box. I told you once I didn't want silver spoons or grand halls, but I did want this. She opened the box slowly, revealing a document, sealed and stamped. This is the founding charter for the Aisha Thompson Health Fund, a foundation to provide free pediatric care for children in under-resourced communities. This is our wedding gift. There was no applause. Not yet. Only the sound of breathing, the kind that's held when something sacred unfolds. Charles lowered his gaze. Evelyn wiped her cheek discreetly. Even Ethan looked away. The silence wasn't heavy, it was reverent. Michael took her hand, pressed it to his lips. I don't have vows better than that, he said, his voice cracking just slightly. But I promise to stand beside you for every life we touch. Now, the room exhaled. The priest nodded once more. You may kiss. And when they did, it wasn't grand or staged. It was soft, real, as if two souls had simply leaned into one truth. And the applause that followed didn't just fill the chapel, it cracked something open. Not a celebration, but a recognition that something had changed. The building had once been a warehouse, steel bones, concrete floors, broken windows where pigeons used to nest. Now, it breathed again. The sign out front was simple, painted in deep navy and brushed gold. The Aisha Thompson Health Hub. Aisha stood by the entrance that morning, white coat over a linen blouse, stethoscope slung not around her neck, but looped gently in her hand. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint, floor wax, and new beginnings. Inside, the place pulsed with quiet motion. Exam rooms, yes, but also classrooms, open labs, and a wide, sunlit atrium with laptops lined up in rows. Young people moved through the space with clipboards and curiosity. "This," Aisha said softly to a group of interns gathered near the vital station, "isn't just about medicine. It's about listening. You're not here to treat numbers. You're here to meet lives." The students nodded, some taking notes, others simply watching her. Not out of obligation, but admiration. At the back of the room, Michael adjusted a monitor, wires in hand, smile easy. He caught her eye, winked. She smiled back. In the break room, a local news crew waited, camera poised, mic clipped discreetly to her collar. The interviewer leaned forward. "Dr. Thompson, 6 months ago, some of the people closest to your husband weren't exactly supportive. If you could say one thing to them now, what would it be?" Aisha paused. Her eyes didn't harden. They softened. "I don't have to say anything," she replied, her voice calm. "Our life speaks for itself." Outside, the sun had risen higher, casting long slants of light through the windows. The light touched the edge of a mural being painted in the east corridor, brushstrokes forming the silhouette of a young black girl with a stethoscope. Just before noon, a student, no older than 15, rushed up to Aisha, chart in hand. Her hair pulled into tight braids, eyes lit with nervous pride. "I passed the blood pressure test," the girl said. "And I think I want to be a doctor, like you." Aisha knelt slightly to her height, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You already are," she said. "You just haven't gotten your coat yet." The girl flung her arms around Aisha, hugging tight. Not out of obligation, but out of hope. A camera shutter clicked somewhere in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, Aisha closed her eyes. Not from weariness, but from peace. The applause from 6 months ago had faded, the judgments long silenced, but what remained was this. Not legacy by bloodline, legacy by choice, by purpose, by love. And she wouldn't trade it for the world.